My name is Liz Rosinski, and I'm the Grants Program Director for the South Carolina Rural Infrastructure Authority. Before we get into the details of what will be required of you all as SCIIP grantees, allow me to provide a quick overview of basic grant management procedures, beginning with grant startup. By and large, this is the same process that is used for state-funded RIA grants from past grant cycles. Shortly after the board met, grant award letters signed by our Executive Director, Bonnie Ammons, were mailed to the Chief Executive Official for each grantee. This packet included her cover letter, documents that make up the grant agreement as seen in the slide, and the authorized signature form. Let's go through this packet in more detail. 2 copies of the grant award were issued and included in the packet. Both copies had Bonnie's original wet signature, meaning it was signed with pen and ink. If you have not already, the Chief Executive Official for the grantee should execute both copies of the grant award and return one originally signed to RIA by Thursday, June 8, 2023. Grant Agreement Exhibit A deals with supplemental grant conditions, while Exhibit B deals with federal award identification information. The grantee is expected to fill out and retain Exhibit B for auditing purposes, but it does not need to be returned to RIA. I do think it is important to note that representatives of the grantee that will be involved in any part of the SCIIP project need to read and understand the terms and conditions of the grant agreement and exhibits in order to understand the responsibilities of the grantee in executing a SCIIP grant. Also included in the packet that was mailed is a list of special conditions. New this time is that those special conditions are a separate sheet from the signature page, which is different from how you would have received them in the past. The purpose of these special conditions is to clarify or expand upon eligible activities, procedures, and/or performance requirements for the grant. Some are to remind you of what is expected. The type and number of conditions varies for each grantee. Some of them are standard conditions that everyone has. Others are unique to the project. Some even have their own special deadlines that must be met prior to getting a notice to proceed. Just like our state program, we may ask for revised documents related to the SCIIP application. If there were mathematical errors or changes in budget as a result of a reduced grant award, then contact your grant manager to discuss further. Likewise, if the condition is about specific activities that are designated for funding, contact us. We sometimes ask for funding commitments, either revised because again of an error or the grant award was reduced, but occasionally because the funding was not fully in place at time of application. The deadline to submit that funding commitment is within 90 days of award. Another example of a special condition is that RIA may have required a grantee to utilize the services of their local council of government in helping to implement the grant, and relevant documentation showing an agreement between the grantee and the COG would need to be submitted within 45 days of startup. Keep in mind that any contracts with the COGs are separate and not part of anything related to SCIIP. Documentation of complying with any SCIIP grant award special conditions should be submitted within 45 days of grant award. However, this does not apply to conditions like requiring submittal of a bid form or a bid package for RIA to review before advertising. A startup technical assistance meeting with the assigned RIA grant manager is a requirement of everyone's special conditions. By now, you should have received an email communication to start looking at dates, or perhaps it is already scheduled. Led by RIA staff, the meeting will review grant procedures as well as roles and responsibilities for the project. Attendees should include those responsible for project implementation, as well as the authorized representatives designated on the authorized signatures for payments and checks form. And if possible, project engineers and grant consultants should also attend. How the required startup will be carried out, whether it's virtually or in person, will depend on a number of considerations, such as complexity of the project, the grantee's past grant performance, or if it is a first-time grantee with RIA. Regardless, there should be only one meeting with all pertinent staff in attendance. Schedules proposed in the grant application will be one of the major items discussed at startup. This is because those schedules are now 8 months old, and there's a federally mandated deadline looming over everything. So be prepared to update your RIA grant manager on status, details, and advise them of any changes. While you see the authorized signature form mentioned on this slide, there's more detailed in the financial management section of the implementation workshop. But I will point out, like other documents, it should be submitted by June 8th, 2023. The intent of the form is to specify who is authorized on behalf of the grantee to request and disperse grant funds. As part of the authorized signature form now available for SCIIP funds, grantees must include verification that they are registered in the System for Award Management Database. This is also known as SAM. Verifying debarment status is a federal requirement, and registration through SAM is the easiest route to do that. So how do you register? You'll just need to visit the website, and you'll want to initiate this fairly quickly if you have not already, because it can take some time to be processed. There is no charge, but again, it does take time, and according to the website, about 10 days. And I suspect, given the traffic across all states, that is likely longer. Now, this slide will only apply to some of the SCIIP grantees. A subrecipient agreement is required if an entity other than the SCIIP grantee will be responsible for implementing any portion of the project. The grantee must submit a proposed subrecipient agreement to RIA no later than June 23rd, 2023, and more importantly, prior to its execution. Subrecipients include governmental or not-for-profit water and/or sewer organizations. There is an agreement sample in the project management procedures. It can also be found on our website on the Forms and Documents page under Resources. It is important to use this document to clearly establish the roles and responsibilities of each party. Some of the language included in the agreement requires compliance with federal and state requirements to pass through from the grantee to the subrecipient. If all startup information has been appropriately submitted and found to be acceptable by RIA, we will issue a notice to proceed, confirming that startup has been successfully completed or cleared. The notice to proceed is required prior to incurring any construction costs or seeking reimbursement of eligible non-construction expenses as part of the grant. This means we cannot move on to reviewing contracts and processing pre-award expenses until the notice to proceed has been issued. And this should generally not take more than 6 months for the grantee to submit required documents. However, a grantee can be moving forward on procuring an engineer. You just can't enter into the contract until RIA reviews. Likewise, any local match activities could and should be underway while clearing any special conditions or startup activities. We feel the key to success, which means your SCIIP project is fully expended and complete ahead of the federal deadline, will be carrying out activities concurrently as just described when appropriate. Rather than taking one step at a time, determine when feasible what can be going on at the same time. But don't get too far ahead, as execution of contracts and payments to contractor prior to an RIA notice to proceed or RIA review of procurement procedures in contracting is at the grantee's own risk and may not be eligible for payment with SCIIP funds. Nearly all of the applications did not indicate pre-award expenses. However, if you think you have any, please contact your grant manager immediately. As you will hear us say over and over, RIA is required by the U.S. Treasury to have all federal funds expended by December 31st, 2026. Thus, each grantee must be able to implement projects in a timely manner in order for RIA to meet that expenditure deadline. While this may seem far off in the future, given the size and scope of many of the proposed SCIIP projects and the potential for a limited number of contractors available for this work, this federal deadline will be here before we know it. First, please note that if you have received a planning grant, that grant period is shorter than the others, and it must be completed and closed by April 2025. The June 1st, 2026 completion date is basically a 3-year grant period for all SCIIP capital improvement projects. This is 12 months longer than the typical RIA grant period, and this is the deadline RIA has set to ensure SCIIP funds can be expended by the federal deadline of December 2026, which is the absolute. It is very important to meet the federal expenditure deadline because if we don't spend it, we lose it. And we definitely don't want that to happen. We have established the June completion deadline to allow us time as an agency to make adjustments as necessary. That includes evaluating progress throughout the life of the project to ensure that it gets completed in a timely manner. It is the responsibility of a SCIIP grantee to take appropriate action to ensure a timely implementation of the SCIIP-funded project before December 31st, 2026. Upon issuing the RIA notice to proceed, a project must be substantially underway within a reasonable time frame to meet the schedule. By substantially underway, I mean that within 15 months of award or July 2024, the project or projects should be advertised. If construction work has not been advertised for bid within 15 months of grant award, or if at any time the project falls substantially behind the schedule proposed in the approved application, the grantee must provide an explanation for delays, as well as an updated project schedule showing detailed tasks to be accomplished and estimated completion dates. As I referenced a few slides back, we understand that some projects can be underway well ahead of this 15-month mark. And we also know that other, more complicated projects may take longer. But I do caution you that if projects are beyond the 15-month mark, it is up to the grantee to demonstrate how you can still complete the project within the project grant period. We will expect that you stick to the schedule presented to us. Ultimately, it means careful, detailed project management, unlike some of the flexibility we have had in the past. Similarly, if there is an unexpected delay, it is the grantee's responsibility to notify RIA immediately and to provide a revised but detailed project schedule. The quarterly progress report, which is required to be submitted by the grantee, must reflect the current project status, detailed steps taken to address any delays, as well as explain how federal funds can be spent and the project completed within the approved grant period. This form has been modified to make it easier to complete, and you can listen to the grant management section for more information. The SCIIP federal expenditure deadline represents a spend it or lose it requirement, and I know I'm repeating myself, but we do not want to send any funding back due to an expenditure delay. Dare I say that the federal deadline is the single most important requirement associated with this grant program. If a project is not deemed to be substantially underway within a reasonable time frame, RIA reserves the right to reduce the scope of work or rescind or deobligate any remaining SCIIP awards so that the funds can be redirected to other projects that can be implemented in a timely manner. Evaluate your projects. If they are straightforward and simple, there is no need to wait until the 15-month mark to advertise. Truth is, you want to get ahead. It could pay off. We already saw this with a project or two that have already had their bids opened. Admittedly, as an agency, we were a month behind schedule from the original first quarter, while we waited for the General Assembly to take action. But when they did, and the governor signed on a Thursday, we were fully prepared to act, and we did on a Monday, by holding that board meeting 5 days later. We never stopped working towards the goal. We thought there may be delays, so we anticipated and still moved forward as if. And this is how every SCIIP grantee should be working. Are you waiting on something? Then work on another task. No one can afford delays. All of us have been around this for a while, and we know how things work. Anticipate, plan, prepare. That will ensure success. To wrap up my section, I thought it would be helpful to walk through the timeline for a typical SCIIP project. The schedule assumes that you have carefully thought through the project and all of the SCIIP requirements, and you can reasonably expect to carry out the project as outlined in our application. For most of the SCIIP projects, we feel that there's more than enough time to carry out the project and expend the funds within the guidelines. We recognize that some of the more complicated projects will be right on the cusp of that deadline, especially when it comes to drawing down those grant funds. Our message today and through the coming years will be to stay on task. Know that there could be delays at any of the steps you will need to complete, as indicated in the slide, whether it's design, permits, acquisition, bid openings, or supply chain holdups. Do your best to anticipate and, more importantly, keep us informed. With each numbered step on these slides, there is a time frame that reflects when these steps and activities typically should occur during the implementation of the project. The dates on the timescale are specific to SCIIP projects. The process begins with the award that was made in April of 2023. With 45 to 60 days, you should clear that startup and have a notice to proceed issued. For those of you that have not procured your engineer, either because you were waiting on grant funds or for some other reason, that process should begin immediately if you've not already started. And by early fall, around September, again, for most of the projects, especially if they are design bid build, that activity should be underway with an expectation that permits are obtained next spring. Noted in the project management procedures, which by the way should be one of your go-to resources for the next few years, the project should be out for bid by midsummer of 2024, which is roughly July, and a signed contract by October 2024. We've essentially built in an 18-month construction period, which should suffice for a majority of the projects. Again, there are a number of more complicated projects that will take longer, and we hope that many of these steps have already begun and possibly completed to allow yourself plenty of time to carry out construction. Again, we know that not everyone falls neatly into this time frame, but such specific scenarios and discussions can be part of the startup meetings with your respective grant manager. Finally, as we also currently manage with our monitoring and closeout procedures, RIA staff will allow time to review and close out the projects, all well within the current grant period. Again, this is a quick general overview for a typical project. We will be steadfastly watching the schedules and any changes for your projects because RIA wants to ensure that all funds are expended and nothing is returned to Treasury. But in order for us to carefully monitor, you all must keep us posted. If there are any changes to the schedule, please discuss with your grant manager. And when there are delays, strategize and have a plan that will allow you to meet the federal deadline and fully complete the project. So say what you mean and then mean what you say, especially when it comes to the SCIIP schedule. Thank you for your time. This is Liz Rosinski.